Hi, I'm David Morgan.
And I'm Bill Tillman.
Welcome to this episode of Everyday Ethics, the seventh and final episode of season one. Bill, throughout these seven episodes, you and I have used your book, Christian Ethics, a Triadic Approach, as a guide to our time together. We have introduced such frameworks for Christian ethics using that triad, as you mentioned, uh, dealing with the framework of obligation, goals or aims in Christian life and relationships. You used a second, and we've talked about a triad of overarching values: accountability, forgiveness, and courage. Today, we're going to talk about a third triad that you introduce in your book, the triad of money, sex, and power. Um, we've had conversations and received contact from folks who have listened to our podcast. And one of the conversations that I've had are folks wondering, are we ever going to get to issues? And yes, we are. And I recognize, and you and I have talked about the disappointment that some experience because we have not done with this, dealt with issues as many would have wanted us to do. But you and I have both agreed that while issues are crucial for Christian ethics, there's a foundation that will help us to place these issues in context, to deal with those in a manner in which we can provide maybe guidance and direction rather than just periods of argument with each other. And so we're going to move into that today. And so we're going to take three chapters of your book today, one on each one: money, sex, and power.
Have to speed read now.
Yeah, speed read. And so I'm just curious, what do you think? I mean, how do you feel about us cramming three of these large, I mean, these are shaping,
Sure.
guiding parts of every human life. I mean, what do you think about us just cramming it all into one short
Oh,
podcast?
well, it's the season of putting things together and doing what you can with it.
Wait,
Well,
let me quickly interrupt.
yeah, sure.
Before you talk about that, if our listeners want to look at detail, these chapters will be available
Yeah,
on the TB Maston website. Go up, sorry.
right. And with other items, I mean, you
Right.
have a piece for further conversation, some other things. And that's part of the point. You brought up the matter of issues. Um, Years ago, there was this student I had in class. We'd gone about, a month into the class time and for that semester and held up his hand in kind of this laconic approach of, we've spent all this time. When are we going to talk about ethics? And my response was, well, we've been talking about ethics all along. That if you're asking when are we going to be talking about issues, we've been talking about issues all along. But the conversation may not have been shaped in ways that you could identify your pet concerns or those things that you try to get into argument with people about. And usually the products of those, there's more heat than light
Right.
on that. And certainly that's the position lots of us find ourselves in now. We have to be careful with conversation. Anything we say, like this podcast publicly, that presents what I would call an extreme position on the matter. So in short, we have addressed issues all
Mhm.
along. The first six episodes, the conversations haven't been shaped in language necessarily for those that don't um, go beyond impressions about how they feel. I mean, there's a lot of emotional dynamic in this bit of talking about things that are important to us. With money, sex, and power, why this fit for the final episode, there are more interface between these three major concepts than separation.
Mm.
And that's one of the tendencies that we have in culture, whether it's, at large or in congregational life. We tend to isolate, put in silos, compartments, this matter, this matter, this matter, and never recognizing necessarily the interface, even the interchange among these. So it's rather fitting that we do it like this in this conversation. And certainly there is availability with the further resources that you put in. If somebody wants to do further conversation, say use these episodes in a study course
Oh,
manner,
right.
however they might want to do it. So, but does that get it? What you
I think that pretty much, gets
okay?
at what you were thinking about as well. You mentioned, I mentioned triads, and as you were talking, and I know you're a science person, uh,
Well,
and I
have been.
have been. I am
Yeah.
not a math person. I remember very little of the math
Yeah.
from my earlier years.
Yeah.
But another concept that I have thought of as I was just thinking about money, sex, and power, and you talk about the relationship and interfacing between those is, would a Venn, I mean, it doesn't fit into your triads, but wouldn't Venn diagrams work very well with this?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
my impression is it would almost be instead of three distinct with a little center, it would be three circles with mostly all of it in the center of the three of
Right.
them.
Right. That's and not everybody may be familiar with the Venn diagram. That you might describe that, David. So
Well,
that
Venn diagram is basically three circles
yeah.
or more. Normally you see it in three,
Yeah.
but they intersect each other and they create areas. I mean, you have two circles and you put them together and they have a common area between them. And then if you add a third one, and the usual thing is at the bottom, you just push it up. And so you have relationships between, say, money and sex, and
Hmm.
you'd have a relationship between money and power.
Yeah.
Then you'd have a third over in facing between, sex and power. And then that center section, uh, usually illustrated as a very small section in
Yeah.
textbooks, is where
Yeah.
all three would interface. In the
Yeah.
case of money, sex, and power, uh, I mean, it would be that would be the largest portion, I think, of where they interface with very little
Right.
independence of what each one would have unique to itself.
Well, an obvious connection you just made for me. Um, I mean, you represent the TB Maston Foundation.
Right.
And there's Maston. Um, all through his career, he talked about the marriage of identifying either or positions,
Hmm.
and that really wasn't the way we should be making decisions, either or, because things aren't usually that clearly cut, though people still operate that way. And his approach was more, it's going to be both and.
Hmm.
There are matters of consequence and truthfulness in all of these positions. Uh, and I learned that from Maston, but on into my own um, teaching career, decided that there was enough complexity in society and culture that it wasn't a matter of just two things,
Mm.
even implied with both and, that we have a multifaceted matter, often way complicated, complex beyond our usual sense of understanding life. And that's one of the reasons why people, want to jump to issues and one particular position. It's convenient. Um, it's, well, I won't say simplified. It actually becomes simplistic.
Hmm.
And the matters of that, the consequences, which we talked about back in some of the earlier
Right.
episodes, um, can be missed when just a single solitary facet of a matter is examined and a potential fixing of that, if it's off track, is the one that should be done. It becomes a short-sighted consequence. And I think culture, humankind live in that constant state of trying to repair short-sighted consequences that
Hmm.
result of people before us. And that will figure in, I think, into even these podcasts that we're talking about. These are long-term matters
Hmm.
that
Right.
yet can't be dealt with just overnight.
One of the, we've used the terms money, sex, and power. One of the things I noticed in your book that it was very helpful and a reminder of what we've talked about really this whole season, you went back to the creation accounts again to talk
Ah,
about these
yeah,
three
yeah,
issues, three
yeah,
concepts.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and so, you defined money I think of money as, okay, I was going to say, I think of it as the dollar bills in my back pocket and change in my front pocket.
Yeah.
Okay, it's more like the credit cards that I have anymore, sadly.
You don't see money.
Yeah,
No.
I was going to say, can't even get a penny now if I need one, you
Right.
know.
There you go.
And I always thought, our thoughts, we can't, we used to have a penny for our thoughts. We're doing better now. It's going to cost a nickel to get what we think. Uh, but
Right.
we digress. We
Maybe
come
not.
back to the idea, though, that you
Yeah.
point out that money's tied into the stuff around
Yeah.
us.
Creation, material goods.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
And
created world. Well, and I mean, you went back to Genesis. There was nothing that we would call money
right.
then. Uh, um, the power of exchange,
Mm,
wealth was measured in possessions like herds of goats and sheep and cattle and camels.
mm,
And that continued on pretty much through the creation of the Old Testament. Um, by the time you get to the prophets, and the earliest of those probably about 8th century BC, I mean, that's lots of centuries before us. Um, do they talk about matters that can be measured in what we might call coinage?
mm,
Um, but the interesting thing, I mean, go a little apart from just the tactility of it, is that um, the wealth, money, economy, material goods uh, had a marked place in the theology of the Hebrews. And that pretty much runs through all the cultures, that there is this sense of what we can possess and how we use it. And there is the particular key. how how generous are we with it when we have enough,
mm.
and how much is enough?
Right.
Um, and that's going to be the individual conscience, shaped by a corporate conscience, probably. Um, but the same with each of the other categories, money, sex, and power. There they are in the first, second chapters of Genesis. Male and female, created,
Mm.
and the offering from God to the humans of having dominion, and careful to say not domination,
Right.
dominion, and a better word would be stewardship. And you could even go as far as saying, from God to the people, be my co-creators. So all of this is handed to the humans and take care of it. And all the exchanges you have.
Mm.
And that taking care, that dominion, that is a power word, influence word.
Mm.
So,
No, I found myself this morning before we got together watching a short documentary on It's a Wonderful Life.
oh,
It's Christmas. We're going to all see it at some point or another. Uh, and one of the things that was mentioned in that, and I guess I didn't realize it, was reminded of that, is that one of the reasons that has become such a popular movie is in the early 1970s, somebody forgot to renew the copyright.
ah,
And it became public domain for a period of time. And I remember everyone was showing it constantly. It seemed like at Christmas. And it has now become, well, it's my most favorite movie, and many other people find
oh,
it enduring. But as you look at the content of that, you realize the importance of money
yeah.
and the banker. In fact, and one of the things the documentary pointed out was that somebody questioned whether or not this was communist propaganda because bankers looked bad.
Ah, okay.
Okay. And then I mean, that was part of it. And then the power issue, money issue, uh, you know, just, just one example. We even have a current example, and you and I have talked about Jeffrey Epstein and everything that's going along with that right now. It
Right,
seems to be sometimes it's not the top story, but seldom does it seem to be not mentioned in a newscast
right.
now at all. It, share thoughts on that.
Well, there are all the elements of our triad, money, sex, and power. And it's well, it probably is going to serve as a case study for years to come,
Mm.
um, on how those things uh, can be misused. Um, but just exorbitant amounts of money exchanged, sex trafficking, um, and apparently the power of extortion over those who are brought in,
Mm.
both to be groomed, to be part of the sex trafficking operation, but also those high finance people, exorbitantly rich people brought in to participate in that and extorting power over them and getting money. That if you don't send me money, I'm going to tell everybody that you've
Mm.
been here. Um, and there are other, of course, smaller scale kinds of things that happen daily. Um, and money, sex, and power, and this kind of exchange going on, often unlabeled.
Right.
And that's part of the point, I think, of this podcast today, that we try to provide some ways for people to identify the inner workings of these dynamics that happen. For instance, to be able to recognize a scam. I mean, a lot of that's going on now.
Mm.
Uh, be aware these kind of calls will come in. Be aware you get these kind of texts. Um, and, you dig into the scams where, some law enforcement has figured them out. There can be two, three, four points of exchange of information And at some place along the way, there is somebody that will have gathered our personal information and can get into an account,
Hmm.
things like that. Um, well, that's money and power, but also it seems like there is the interface of matters of sexuality that get tied into that.
Right.
I mean, it's a larger matter of scamming going on
Mhm.
and somebody basically robbing the population. That's the
Mm. Well, I appreciate that broader description of what's going on in these three. Because see, I grew up at a time that I our church taught about money, if I remember correctly. That
yeah.
is, you ought to pay your bills, which included your 10% tithe,
Okay.
and give to the special offerings at the seasons of Easter and Christmas. And
Right.
beyond that, I don't remember a whole lot about us saying anything about money in church.
Right.
And for we talked about sex in church to the extent that you don't have sexual activity until you get married,
Right.
and that's the extent of what we heard about money and sex.
That was sex education.
And power was, I don't ever remember hearing sermons on power influence. Well, we were supposed to influence the congregate. We're supposed to influence the world.
Yeah.
And how do you go about doing that? Well, you can make laws about how we ought to live as Christians, and blue laws in Texas and other places show that really doesn't work real well.
Yeah.
Uh, so we've tried all of these, but when I grew up, it was all individual. You can do this as an individual, or you can't. But I appreciate you pointing out the broaderness of sex traffic and the abuse of power on a
Yeah.
larger scale over this. And speaking of power, uh, in your book, you talk about John Kenneth Galbraith and his
Yeah.
statements on power, and I mean, quite an influential economist in his day.
Yeah. The book that I referenced was The Anatomy of Power.
Mm.
And when I first came across it, it was published in 1983. So more than 40 years ago. Here is this, and it's a rather popularly written book. And that was part of the appeal of Galbraith in his day. He could take these quite complex economic matters and put them into language that people could consume. But that was his point, though, the anatomy of power of the relationship to the economy
Hmm.
and how power is expressed through, and I'll just leave it with money. And he divided that, and here we go, trying to offer some points of identification for anybody that would watch or listen to this podcast. But he talked about the raw brute force of power, that the influence, if you don't respond to it, there will be threats and violence will be given if you don't respond to this influence.
It sounds a
Uh,
lot like bullying.
Very much that fits. Yeah. And all the definitions of violence, whether it's individual or corporate, whether it's visible or passive, work in here. And there are levels of violence, of abuse,
Mm.
but that's in his first category. Um, there is what he called the compensatory power, money. Um, and those of us that have had jobs, have jobs, will have jobs. Our employers have the power, the compensatory power over us.
Right.
You do the job, you'll get paid for it. And go back to the creation accounts, there are different ways that the compensations were made. the trading of herds, the trading of um, people, workers. Um, then finally, Galbraith talked about this power of uh, persuasion. And this is the matter of using reason, uh, making the best argument about influencing someone to your position. The one way that some reviewers have organized him, Galbraith, was around the ideas of force, money, and ideology.
Mm,
And all of those fit uh, whatever organization we work with. I mean, here's the idea of identifying what we live with, live in. Um, how do you operate in that? And that's where I found coming across Wayne Oates. I mentioned him earlier in our podcast,
mhm.
but he gave very quick identification of how leader types can and do use power, how they use influence. And he said there is the power of the center, that you are in an organization and you are in the core of it, an organization. It could be a congregation, and you are the shaper of the movement, the tracking of that organization from inside out. And the other style of influence, he called it the power of the periphery or the boundary, power of the boundary. And I think he drew that idea from Paul Tillman.
Okay.
Um, and that is the role of the consultant, the advisor. And I think it fits more the model of this persuasive idea from Galbraith, that you think of an organization, a corporation, and occasionally they call in people to consult. And back in my education days, I think of accreditation agencies. On a regular schedule, the accreditors come in, they work through all the documents of the institution. They have interviews with faculty, trustees, all the people. Then they make their report. Where is the institution meeting standards that everyone has agreed to?
Right.
Where they're meeting standards or not, where and how they might improve if they need to, and then they go away. That's the power of the boundary. They're in the center,
Hmm.
but they don't stay there.
Okay.
Um, Now, all of us, I think, have these dynamics about us day to day, and that we move back and forth depending upon where we are and with whom we are. That we may be in the center of a group decision making, or we may be the advisor type making the suggestions. Just get caught up in a conversation, a dialogue, and well, my thought about this is, well, that's the power of the boundary.
Hmm.
So a really quick synopsis of
Yeah, it
how.
really was. One of the things that struck me as you were talking about the power of the boundary of the edge,
Yeah,
would biblical, it appears to me that biblical prophets were in
yes,
the circle, but they were on the edge of the circle.
yes,
And would it not be true to say that maybe even today that the church at its best
mm,
in a culture or a society is in the circle, but we're still on the edge?
right.
And it might be time for us to have a more vocal role and a more active role in creating change, transformation of a culture. And I know that gets us into an entirely new
Yeah.
dynamic, but does not the world need that witness from a congregation and the church as a whole at this point?
Well, at first, yes, I would agree.
Hmm.
Um, and one perspective, if you set the Bible aside from being, inspired, holy writ, all of that, but look at it as a kind of report. Now, I know this is hard for some people to imagine, but it's always intrigued me that the people that are highlighted, the character studies, like the prophets, but on into the New Testament, and all of that was put together under the time of the Roman Empire. All of these narratives are minority reports.
Mm.
They are people that are not close in to the ones who are moving society in the direction they want to. I mean, think about the Roman Empire. You had the Caesars who, after, around the time that Jesus was born, they began to take on the term, like the Pharaohs did, that they were God
Mm.
and demanded worship in that extent. And I can see that happening in our own time. There are those figures in our society, globally, that basically declare themselves, I am the decision maker, and you
Mm.
fall under all of this. Um, Constantly, though, through the biblical history, church history, now our own history, there are resistors. That was a major part of what we call the Reformation. That for those people who pulled away from the church, capital C, they had seen that it had become too negative
Mm.
with regard to human rights, money, um, and treating people as secondary human beings, if human beings at all. So resisted that with theological language, interestingly. And there's time, I think, for another Reformation. Yeah,
Think so.
yeah, yeah.
With our conversation today on money, sex, and power, uh, again, talking about the role of the church and all of that, I feel like season one has now come full circle.
Wow.
When I
Well,
begin,
I'm glad you feel completed.
maybe some gaps in the circle, but
Okay.
you may or may not remember that when we began this, I commented, and shared with the folks that you and I had prepared a seminar workshop 3 years ago,
Oh,
the
yeah.
title of which was Both and Seeking Common Good in a Jaded, Worn Out, Exhausted, Tired World.
The title alone was worth picking up.
That's right. The title alone exhausts me. And the exhaustion continues even after our
Yeah,
season of episodes.
yeah.
Nothing has happened since September that has really drastically transformed, changed any of my thoughts on this. If anything, the exhaustion feels even worse.
Mm,
Uh,
yeah.
we come to this time, Christmas, a time of supposedly joy and the like, and I feel almost as distressed. And hopelessness is too strong a term, but there is a strong concern that I have that maybe the church is not having the role in society that it should have, and society is certainly not what it ought to be, nor has God created it to be. Uh, at that same first episode, I commented that this is the situation in which we find ourselves is nothing new. The church has always struggled when we were talking about power, and you mentioned even coercion and force. And I thought even the church has been involved historically in the
Oh,
abuse
yeah.
of power in those kind of ways. But the
Yeah.
church is
Think Crusades, the Inquisition.
right.
Yeah.
Uh, The church has struggled. We're still struggling, obviously, and I suspect that in the days to come, we will continue to struggle. You and I have talked about the importance of conversation, the
Mm.
importance of bringing people together in an effort to reduce the polarization that we find in our society today. But I ran across an article the other day from Sojourners that suggested that perhaps we need to do a bit more than just engage in civil conversation in
Ah.
seeking to bridge barriers and bring us together in conversation. But the writers suggested that what we really need in today's world is
Mm.
a vision of what God can do. And you mentioned all of the powers and the rulers today, leaders that can be authoritarian. And perhaps the vision that we need is a vision where Christ is king once again, as Christmas talks about in many of the
Ah.
carols that we sing. And I think Christmas brings out the fact that we continue to have a hope. Uh, and yet, for those of us who are in a Christian tradition, there's the Advent, the darkness, the
Hmm.
waiting that comes before that. But Christmas comes bringing Jesus, the light of the world, a light that we need. And I think that perhaps this season is a time that we can, to use conversation today, that we move from a notion of power being that which oppresses
Yeah.
to understanding a power that comes from God in Christ that liberates and frees.
Ah.
Um, we have seen, continue to see the abuse of money, sex, and power. And I would like for us to envision a time where our world remembers and restores the times when money, sex, and power were used for good
Ah.
and not for bad or for evil.
Yeah.
I think we can envision our world today with Christ as head. And as I thought about that, I ran across a quote yesterday from Munther Isaac. I don't know if you remember right off, but Munther Isaac is a Palestinian Lutheran pastor in the
Okay.
West Bank. Uh, Here's what he said: the kingdom has been inaugurated not as a worldly power, but as love, service, and sacrifice. Jesus founded a community built not on weapons, but on mercy, not on domination, but on humility. He gave us a new law to love God and love our neighbor. This kingdom still grows like a mustard seed. It spreads through acts of mercy, through forgiveness, through quiet faithfulness.
Mm.
I pause and I thank those of you who have journeyed with us, accompanied us during our first season on our journey as we seek to help assist you and ourselves into achieving the vision that I think Christ has given you and us. And I invite you to join us in season 2 as we continue to explore what it means for us to walk as Jesus walked. Thank you. Thank you, Bill.
Thank
See you
you.
next season.
Good to be with you. Ah, yes.
Everyday Ethics is brought to you by the T.B. Maston Foundation, which seeks to proclaim the abiding relevance of the whole gospel of Jesus Christ and provide support for the study and application of Christian ethics. For more information or to donate, visit tbmaston.org.